Now, as we think about going back to school, children, I'm going to ask you, and parents, like I know this could be a little dicey, why do you go to school? Anybody? Pardon? To learn. What kind of things do you learn at school? Maths? English? Anything else? Any other children? Pardon? Spelling words? Welsh. Ooh, well done. I didn't learn any Welsh at school, and don't ask me. Anything else? Anybody else? Some things that you learn? I think some of it, it's what they actually enjoy learning. Yes. Science. Do you like science? Yes. Anybody else? RE. Very good. So lots of things. So when you think about school, you think about learning, right? And where there is learning, you also have teaching, right? You can't learn much without being taught something. And sometimes it can be self-taught, but most often it is from other people. Now, another kind of the cultural word that we think of sometimes is influence or influencer, and that's often outside of school. Now, when we think about life, every one of us is learning something. Maybe we're not learning as much as we once did, and there is the element that we forgot a lot of the things that we have learned. But just as much as every one of us is learning and should be learning, every one of us also is a teacher. Did you know that? Every single one of us is a teacher in some way, even the children. Children, did you know that you are a teacher? And Jesus even mentions that we as adults should learn something from the children. Now, when we think of that word influencer, and we think of, you may hear of that word influencer, most often it's with social media and influencers, and in one sense it can be scary because the average age of an influencer is, they say, about 23 to 25 years old. And you think about that is the age who has experienced very little in life, and yet they're the ones influencing the children. But yet, on the other hand, Jesus says that we ought to have the children influence us in certain ways, but then there is an element that we have to be careful because we are an influence to the children, but then we'll also see a third part of Jesus' message, looking at the influence of God towards children. Matthew chapter 18, in verse 1, he says, "At that time the disciples came to Jesus, saying, 'Who then is greatest in the kingdom of heaven?' Then Jesus called a little child to him, set him in the midst of them, and said, 'Assuredly, I say to you, unless you are converted and become as little children, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself as this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever receives one little child like this in my name receives me. Whoever causes one of these little ones who believes in me to sin, it would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and he were drowned in the depths of the sea. Woe to the world because of offenses, for offenses must come, but woe to that man by whom the offenses come. If your hand or foot causes you to sin, cut it off and cast it from you. It is better for you to enter into life lame or maimed, rather than having 2 hands or 2 feet to be cast into the everlasting fire. And if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it from you. It is better for you to enter into life with 1 eye, rather than having 2 eyes to be cast into hellfire. Take heed that you do not despise one of these little ones. For I say to you that in heaven their angels always see the face of my Father who is in heaven. For the Son of Man has come to save that which was lost. What do you think? If a man has 100 sheep and one of them goes astray, Does he not leave the 99 and go to the mountains to seek the one that is straying? And if he should find it, assuredly I say to you, he rejoices more over the sheep than over that sheep than over the 99 that did not go astray. Even so, it is not the will of your Father who is in heaven that one of these little ones should perish. So as we consider this passage, I want to think about the first 5 verses there. And the disciples are talking and they say, who is the greatest in heaven? Now, when you think about great, what comes to your mind? Importance, right? Who's the most valuable? Who is the one that has the most worth? The one that achieves the greatest. And that is in our mind. And so these disciples are asking, who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And maybe their thought process is, who is the most important, doing the most, and achieving and accomplishing the most? And what Jesus' response contradicts our mindset. Because as Jesus responded, first he points about getting into the kingdom of heaven. He says basically the first thought you have to really consider is not who is the greatest in, but who is getting in to the kingdom of heaven. And what does Jesus do in this teaching? He takes a little child, picks a little child up, puts him on his lap. Now we don't know how old this child is, but for Jesus to pick him up, I mean, yeah, I can pick up Nathan. Still can pick you up, can't I? Yeah, I can. He's 10 years old. But this little child that Jesus picked up probably was not like a 10-year-old. Probably just a small little infant. Maybe 3, maybe 4, 5, we don't know. He takes this little child, and when you look at a small little child, 3, 4, 5 years old, you might think, how important are they? Now, our culture, our society lifts up children. We elevate, we promote, and we adore children. But back then, during the Roman time, the culture was very much, you are worth what you can achieve and contribute. And if you cannot achieve and if you cannot contribute, well, you are at the bottom of the totem pole. And when you consider with children, what can they contribute? How many of you have a 3-year-old or 4-year-old or 5-year-old that contributes to cleaning the house? That's good. Not very well. How many of them, there's more messes that come from that child than there is the cleaning from that child? And yes, there is a lot more messes that come than the cleaning. How many children contribute to the food at the table? Now, you might get your child to help and prepare the food or whatever, but a young child, they're probably not doing anything to contribute. But they do consume. And so, in one sense, when you think about a child, we think about one who consumes more than contributes. So in their culture, they would be at the very bottom of the totem pole. But yet Jesus lifts this child up, and he says, there is something I want every one of us to learn from this child. And if we don't learn something from this child, we won't even enter into the kingdom of heaven. And what does he mention? He says there, I say to you, unless you are converted, that word converted really means a change of heart. There's something has to happen inside of your heart and become as little children, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. He then says, therefore, whoever humbles himself as this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. He says there is something that every single one of us needs to learn from a child, and that is humility. He says you can't even enter into the kingdom of heaven unless you recognize and are humble within your heart. What does it mean about humility? Well, a child, do they come to the table and lay out everything that they have done that day, and this is the reason why I deserve food at the table? No. They come to the table and they receive. They recognize they are dependent on their parent. And you know, when we come to God, we cannot come to God and just pour out everything. Look at God. This is everything that I have done. I deserve every good thing. I deserve forgiveness. Well, in one sense, some people may not even think they need forgiveness because they're so good, they don't need forgiveness. No, Jesus says, in order to enter into the kingdom of heaven, you must humble yourself. Recognize it is only through Jesus Christ that we can have our sins forgiven. Another element that we can learn from a child is faith. Children are so trusting, aren't they? Sometimes at a fault, right? But as adults, sometimes we think we have figured everything out. But yet we still have to have that element of faith. So when we consider about children, there is an example that we as adults ought to learn from children. The first thing, as Jesus mentions, is humility. Now, the next part Jesus mentions in verse 6 really points to us as adults. We are influencing. We are influencing the children, and what type of influence are we? Verse 6, it says, whoever causes one of these little ones who believes in me to sin, it would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and be drowned, and he were drowned in the depths of the sea. That's pretty graphic, isn't it? I mean, I do have a picture of a millstone. I think it should be right there. Yeah, there it is. I took that picture right there in Israel, in Capernaum. This was about 5.5 years ago. And was able to go there and visit. They say these millstones are about 50 kilos. And they were manufactured right there in Capernaum, where Jesus is teaching. So this picture is probably taken within maybe 50 yards from where Jesus, maybe 100 yards. About 100 yards over is the synagogue there in Capernaum. So right there in the vicinity, only about maybe about 200 yards from this location is the Sea of Galilee. Jesus is using a very vivid picture, and as he's teaching there, he's probably points over right where they're making these millstones and says, you see those millstones? Yeah. Do you see that sea? Yes. If you offend a child, if you cause a child who believes in me to sin, it would be better if you took one of those millstones, tied it around your neck, and you were cast into the sea. That's a pretty strong statement, isn't it? You know, as some people, when they speak about love, they think that the opposite of love is hate. The reality, the opposite of love is indifference. Because what hate does is it points out a different love and something that hurts and is ready to attack that love. You hate what causes, what hinders that which you love. And so as Jesus is pointing about this, and we think about a child and something that hinders a child, Jesus says it would be better for that person to be removed rather than causing offense to that child. Now, we all have a heart for children. When you hear the news and you hear about a tragedy, nearly every time they will list how many children were in that tragedy. Why is that? Because when we think about a child and maybe some children passing away, we think of all of the life ahead of them that is gone. If it's an older person, no offense, but there's an element that we might think, well, they've had a good life. They've had a wonderful many years. But with a child, you think they're just at the prime of life. They've missed out so much. And when you think about a child, in causing an offense or causing a child to sin or causing a child to leave and go away from the Lord, it's not just an event for a child. But so often it hinders the foundation for the many years ahead. And if you cause a child to stray away from the Lord, the remainder of their life, they may be away from the Lord. Their children, their grandchildren. In one sense, you could say, if a person was walking and they changed course just 2 degrees, not a whole lot. If they only walked 10 paces, you might think each pace is 1 year. They wouldn't veer off very far. But what if they had 70 paces and they just changed 2 degrees? At 70 paces, they would be farther off, much farther than where they should have. And the same thing with a child. In the prime of life, the influences that we have in their life, are we putting a good influence for them to have a desire to follow the Lord? Or are we causing an offense in their life that causes them to turn away from the Lord? Now, this could be, you could call sins of commission and sins of omission. Sins of commission are the sins we commit. Sins of omission are sins that, well, it happens because we omit doing something. We don't do something which is good. James mentions, to him that knows to do good and does not do it, to him it is sin. So there are things that we know we should not do, but we do. That's sin. Things that we know we should do, but we don't do it. That's sin. Now we recognize every parent has the biggest influence in a child's life. But even if you're not a parent, you have an influence in these children's lives. And yes, you might think, okay, if you're in Sunday school, you have an influence in their life. But even beyond that, they're watching us. And if you say, I am a Christian, I am a follower of Jesus, what they see in you, they think that's what Jesus is supposed to be like. And are we resembling Jesus the way he ought to be resembled? And I'll get very personal, if you will. And I have mentioned it several times in the past. There are more adults out of church today, not because of disbelief, but because of disunity. And you might even think about your children or grandchildren. And the reason they're not in church today is because many years ago, they saw things happening in the church that they thought, you know what, if that is what Jesus is all about, I don't want to have anything to do with it. So even in the element of unity is a picture to our children of what Jesus is like. I've had friends who saw what happened within church, and they stepped away. And many of them, they may not have said, you know what, I don't believe in God anymore. They just said, I don't want to be a part of the church. Well, the church is the body of Christ. The church is God's people who have come together. And if we want to have a close relationship with Jesus, how can we have a close relationship with Jesus if we don't want to be around his children, God's children? And so when we think about offenses, Jesus says, whoever causes one of these little ones who believes in me to sin, it would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and he were drowned in the depths of the sea. He says, woe to the world because of offenses. For offenses must come. Yes, there's going to be problems. There's going to be temptations. There's going to be trials. But he says, woe to the man by whom the offenses come. Now we'll skip down to verse 10. When we think about the influence of a child that we can learn from a child, we think about our influence to the children, the examples that we set for the children. What are they learning from us? And there's an element. Parents, you may think along this lines as well. When my child does something wrong or they say something wrong, and I ask them, where did you learn this? There is a fear in the back of my mind from you, right? Have you ever had that thought in your mind? And so it is that thought, what type of example am I being to them? Because so often they learn more from what they see than what they hear. But in verse 10, we see the example from God towards children. Jesus says, "Take heed that you do not despise one of these little ones. For I say to you that in heaven their angels always see the face of my Father who is in heaven. For the Son of Man has come to save that which was lost." Jesus says, take heed. Be alert. Listen to what I have to say. He says, do not despise one of these little children. Do not put aside, or that word despise really is dis in esteem, to look down upon. Don't look at a child and look down upon them or think less of them. In one sense, when Jesus says, do not despise, if you wanted to get technical with grammar, you could say there's a double negative there. Do not and despise, D, well, that's two negatives. Don't not do something. Which means, if there's a double negative, it means do, right? And so, in another way, if you don't despise, he says, instead, esteem or think upon, consider, recognize. Why? Why should we recognize children and think about children? He says, for I say to you that in heaven, their angels always see the face of my Father who is in heaven. They're angels. Now, we might hear about guardian angels, and probably this is the closest verse that we would think about, guardian angels over children. Have you ever had a child that is in like split second and you wonder, I don't know how they survived? Well, could it be an angel? I don't know. Anna's parents, they would say, you know what? There might have been an angel with Anna when she was about 2 years old. They went around a corner. I think somebody else was driving. This was in South Africa, so no seatbelts back in the 80s in South Africa. They went around a corner. The door opened. Anna fell out in 4-lane traffic. And her mom said there was somebody that came along, picked her up, brought her to her, and was gone. Never talked to her, never heard anything about it. Was it an angel? I don't know. We don't know. There's so many close encounters that you hear about children. And if it was just 1 millisecond or 1 millimeter different, their life would be gone or altered. Well, Jesus says, God cares about these children. And he has angels that come before his presence who are watching over, and he cares about them. He says, for the Son of Man has come to save that which was lost. Jesus then goes on and he gives the parable, and this parable is also mentioned in Luke in regards when he thinks about, you think about the prodigal son, this lost son, but he also mentions the lost coin and the lost sheep. And considering the wayward, the sinners, the tax collectors. But here in this passage, he refers to it as children. And he says, if you have 100 sheep, one goes astray, what do? Well, you leave behind the 99 and you go after. You search for it. You look for it. You want to find it and bring it back. And Jesus says this is the same thing. The Father, even so it is not the will of your Father who is in heaven that one of these little ones should perish. So we can learn an example from God, the perfect Father, who desires to bring the children in. Why do we place an emphasis with the different children's ministries? It is to teach the Word of God to these young lives, laying a foundation so that they can have it throughout their years. And every single one of us has a part in that. Whether we're a Sunday school teacher or not, remember these children are watching. And what type of example are we being to them? How invested are we in their lives? Asking them about their life, connecting with them. And the more positive influences of adults in their lives, the better. And so Jesus says, don't despise. Consider them. Enter into their lives. Why? Because God our Father cares about these children. So as we think about the influences, children, we can learn from them the humility, depending fully on God. We are an example to these children, but also God is the greatest example of all.